This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast this week in sunny Florida is Doug Dozark, the owner and head brewer for Cycle Brewing. Welcome to the podcast, Doug.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It was a fun drive over from Orlando this morning. I grew up in Orlando. I know you're shaking your head, but I'll tell you, I grew up, and we're doing this in the week of Christmas.
Yep.
Every Christmas day through my entire childhood, we would open our presents in Winter Park, just north of Orlando, on Christmas morning, and then we'd hop in the car and drive over to St. Pete to visit my grandparents for the next part of Christmas.
Oh, Lord.
And so it just felt like a nostalgic trip to sit in traffic on I-4.
Jeez, like nostalgia, like getting bamboo shoots under your fingernails.
Yeah. So we're here in St. Petersburg, Florida. We're going to talk to Doug about brewing, specifically some of the large portion of what they brew here at Cycle, which is barrel-aged imperial stouts. Looking forward to digging into that, some of their thoughts on pasteurization, which they've kind of led the way on in that style of beer. And we're going to talk about a few other things along the way because they are making hazy IPAs and canning and doing all other sorts of fun things here at Cycle Brewing. Before we get into that, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, and dedication to their customers' craft. G&D is committed to cold, whether you operate a brew pub or large-scale production brewery. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention this podcast and receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller. Also, Tavour is the tastiest way to explore the world from the comfort of your home. Select delicious craft beers on the Tavour app that you cannot find in your area and get them delivered right to your door. It's not at the Beer of the Month Club where you end up with duds you have to give to your grandpa. Download the free Tavour app today and get $10 in beer money with code BREWING. And hey, if you're a Tavour user, you might even be able to buy some beer from Cycle right
Absolutely.
here. Huh? So, Doug, walk me through a little bit of your brewing history, how you got to this place today, how you ended up founding Cycle, and how you ended up here we are in a production kind of brewery down the street from the original brewery in downtown St. Pete. What got you here?
This all started with a kid who graduated from college and had a degree in studio art, and no plans to do anything with that other than have the degree. So getting a job, worked at UPS, and then my parents, who are PhDs, said they were tired of teaching. Let's open a restaurant. Great plan. We did. The three of us. That was called Peg's Cantina, and that was where, after 5 years of starting a restaurant, which was very small, we became a brew pub and started brewing and selling the beer in March of 2009. And that was at the same time I began volunteering at Cigar City Brewing in Tampa, which was also just getting started in March of 2009. And I worked simultaneously. I had no family, no kids. So it was 7 days a week, 5 days at Cigar City, Saturday, Sunday at Peg's for years, it seemed like. Eventually I was hired full-time there and worked with Wayne, brewing commercially. And at Peg's I was writing my own recipes, brewing technically commercially, but it was 5 gallons. And then we moved all the way up to a barrel at a time.
Wow.
And then, we actually ran the 1-barrel brew house to fill 7-barrel fermenters for what should have been 3 or 4 months, turned into almost 18 months. Imperial Stout was a 3-day process on that. It was 18 mashes and 6 boils over 3 days to fill one 7-barrel tank. Truly a labor of love there.
And guys are bragging about 36-hour boils today. I mean, they're not nearly putting in what you put in on that.
No, and honestly, a lot of that memory is kind of faded. I mean, I know we did that, but I did that. It was just me for a long time. And then
But you've put that bad memory out of your head.
It wasn't a bad memory.
Yeah.
Those were pure times. I had the time. I had really no constraints. I could do anything I wanted at any time of day. And I did, and it was great. And that was what got, Imperial Stout was one of the third recipe I ever wrote, and it's became Rare DOS after going into some Palm Ridge Reserve barrels. And that's one recipe I've never tweaked. I've probably brewed over 1,000 different IPAs, and I've brewed different Imperial Stouts since, but we've kept Rare DOS. I mean, I was incredibly lucky to come up with that.
So that recipe did not change from the first time you brewed it?
Nope.
Really?
Nope. I mean, the systems have changed, and we've had to. I mean, you have to make adjustments anytime.
Sure.
No, the recipe is, the grains are identical. The percentages might be shifted a little just to hit scale and to hit gravity. I know our gravities have shifted a little bit because we get switching to conical tanks. We got better attenuation than we did in, say, a bucket.
Right.
But really, it was about hitting. It really came down to hitting numbers on the back end, not so much worried about gravity on going into the tank.
I find now the conventional wisdom, of course, is that brewing a system that size, it really doesn't make economic sense, and it's hard to make a business successful brewing at that kind of scale. The flip side of it, as we had Andrew and Kai from Aslan on the podcast, they were talking about how as they brewed on 2-barrel batches as they got started, it was commercial suicide, but what they learned through that process of brewing a lot. And being able to tweak instantly and correct is that they were able to kind of iterate very, very quickly, obviously much more quickly than if you're brewing 15-barrel batches at that scale. But it sounds like that iterative thing didn't need to happen for you on the stout side.
Not on stouts. On other beers for sure. I mean, I think in our first year I did 800 batches, full year. That was probably 7 months of that was 5-gallon batches. So I was doing 5 or 6 a weekend.
Ouch.
Sometimes more. And then once we got up to the barrel size, I brewed less or fewer batches, but it was still. I think we did. I restarted the counter so many times. I don't even remember, but I know we did well over 1,500 batches before we got the 7-barrel tanks, and that was. I mean, it was commercial beer. We sold it. We had our tap room. We had a brand, but the brand was Peg's Cantina and Brew Pub, and that was once we grew beyond just selling it on site. That was where it really became apparent that Cycle Brewing, really a brand, which is what Cycle Brewing is, needed to be spawned because no one's going to go to a place and I want Peg's Cantina and Brew Pub's Dancing Cody IP. Like that's way too much. So we simplified it and it was also a way because for me to get out of the family restaurant business.
Right.
And then it became my own. I got married, and so it was mine and my wife's thing to get Cycle Brewing going. And that's where Cycle as a brand, we were in distribution actually for over a year before we opened the tap room. So Cycle existed for a year, and then we got the tap room open on a shoestring budget. Thanks BP for the oil spill. That settlement money really got us going. That was all we had. And it still kind of shows. It's a little sad how pathetic our tap room is compared to what it. I feel like our image is.
Doug, the proper word is authentic.
Authentic. I've been called that a few times. I've not always gotten a positive connotation with that, but it's not pathetic. It's just small. And when you look around at what other breweries have done, and their tap rooms, and they had investors, and they built this beautiful facility and this beautiful tap room, and it's like we had no money. Our cooler still is. I think we paid $3,000 for it, and some guy with like 4 teeth put it together, and it still works. I mean, it does work. It's very functional, but it is not the image that I think our beer really. I think we have a disconnect there. I think we probably always will.
So let's talk a little bit about the beer then.
Sure.
Or I guess before we do that, you have a separate production facility. Yep. You have a small, and I think when I first visited about 5 years ago in 2014, you were really brewing out of that little, tiny tap room that had some very small fermenters in the back there, and a minuscule brew system. I've probably got pictures of it somewhere on the computer, but
it hasn't changed much.
Yeah.
It's still 4 7-barrel tanks. It's an identical setup to what we were running at Pegs, which did get a 7-barrel brew house eventually. It took a very long time. Somebody stole our money in California and never built the brew house. That was a lesson learned. So eventually we did get a 7-barrel brew house at both locations with 4 7-barrel tanks, and we do still brew downtown at the tap room. Actually, we're legally required to. State of Florida has some rules regarding tiers and production, and so we have to maintain that as a production facility. And it's nice to just do smaller batches that will, just be on site, something that would never go into distro anyway. And
sure,
you want to maintain some freshness, so you don't want 15 barrels of an IPA that is going to take you 3 months to sell.
Right. Now that sounds like a nice scale for those kinds of one-offs that people will pop in just so they can check that single thing into Untapped that doesn't exist anywhere else.
Sure. Yeah.
So here at the production brewery, as we were walking around the brew house earlier, you were talking to me about how you've built this brew house specifically in order to brew stouts, or specifically so that you have the capability to brew big imperial stouts.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about that kind of design process and thought behind that.
Well, that started really the necessity for that came from the early days. I think multiple mashing was something that I picked up at Cigar City. So I think we ended up doing 3 mashes for Marshall Zhukov's at Cigar City, and watching that process and just seeing the way that time worked out. And then we were doing the same thing because there was sort of a standard scale for a brew house. Like your mash tun is this size for this size kettle. But that scale didn't translate into imperial stout or trying to make 30-plus Plato beer. It just they didn't correlate in my mind very well. But they did other beers. So I thought, looking ahead at what our plans, our focus is, what we do the best, or at least what the consumer feels we do the best, is imperial stouts. That's what we're known for. So I thought we should, when it came time to upgrade and invest in the brew house, I measured the space where it would go and said, build the mash tun to maximize this space, just as big as it can be. I need it to be only on one side of the trench drain, but it can be against the wall. So that's the diameter I want on this, and I'll figure out the rest. And they were very reluctant. This was Metalcraft. This was probably one of the last brew houses Metalcraft actually finished. Did not have any indication that what was going to happen with them, but we got our brew house on time, and they've been great. The people who used to work there have still been great. But I just said, do this. And the platform's going to be crooked and lopsided. I was like, this isn't a showpiece. I'm not looking for symmetry. I'm looking for functionality here. This is what I want to be able to do. Oh, well, you're not going to be able to brew your small beers. I said, I'll solve that problem. I can solve that problem.
Right.
What I can't do is continue to have imperial stout be 14-hour days. I don't want to staff for that. I don't need to staff for that. If I could just get this brew house the way I want it. And eventually they came around, and so we ended up with, I believe our mash tun is 46 barrels capacity, and then it's a 15-barrel brew house still. So our kettle goes up to 24 barrels. So if we want to lauter more and boil down for something stupid like 24 to 48-hour boils, just because I don't know why people do that, but whatever. Good enough. We could still do that.
You could.
And actually, that was one of our beers I made a mistake on. I did not throw I was going to rinse the mash tun, and the way the piping is set up, it was also the same port on the panel that would go to fill the kettle, and I ended up basically over-lautering into the kettle by about 3 barrels. I was doing a half batch, so I had like 12 and a half barrels in the kettle, and the stated max capacity on the tank was 8.5. And so, we boiled 9 hours that day. And it wasn't because I wanted to hit gravity. I just wanted to fit in the tank. So I feel like if I could get down to like 9.5, because I'm going to lose at least a barrel to true, it'll fit. And so I just let it roll. I even left for a couple hours because my daughter was singing at some Christmas pageant. And so I left and came back, and it was just boiling away, and we hit 41 Plato on that beer, which did ferment.
Yeah?
Yes. We never measured how low it got because the hydrometer goes to like 26 and a half or 25 and a half, whatever it is. And yeah, it didn't get that low.
Yeah.
It did attenuate to some degree. And the beer, we ended up blending it. It was pretty nice blending stock that went into, I believe that was actually in the third rare scoop. It was one of the scoops we ended up blending that into because that beer can have as much sweetness as you could possibly ever want, and then some, and people still love it.
Before we talk a little bit more, and I'd love to talk about some of the kind of fundamentals of how you build this imperial stout recipe. Before we do that, whether you're a full-scale production brewery, a tap room, or a home brewer striving for the ultimate setup, October Can Seamers has the small-scale canning solution. They've proven that breweries increase revenue through to-go sales with October Can Seamers, and everyone loves to sell more beer. You're only a few clicks away from selling more beer. Just head over to octoberdesign.com/podcast. That's October with a K, and use offer code JAMIE, that's JAMIE, to save $50 on any Can Seamer purchase. Also, balancing barley and hops is your expertise, and for Clarion Lubricants, food-grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert. And when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION. That's 855-692-5274, or visit clarionlubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the experts that experts trust. So we've talked now about how you commercially brew this stout. Let's talk a little bit about the recipe design and how you envisioned this. As I look at where Imperial Stout has gone over the last 9 or 10 years, it has taken some significant turns, even in the last
Definitely.
5.
Yes.
It says something that you've got a recipe that you're still happy with 10 years later,
Yep.
and that even with more tools at your disposal in terms of ingredients and whatnot, as you've developed in your professional career and operating this brewery over the last decade, you have now a lot more tools at your disposal. Talk to me a little bit about how you initially envisioned that and how you made some of the ingredient and kind of process choices around that.
Oh, the first it's been a long time since writing that first stout, but I some of it was based on a failure of a porter recipe that I wrote. But there were some grains that I used that I really liked, and one grain that I encountered at Cigar City that I don't know if Wayne actually likes it or not, but is Breeze's Special Roast. So that I wanted to use the Special Roast, and then it came down to basically creating a caramel backbone and then kind of adding the chocolate elements on top. And I believe the first recipes incorporated, or the first batches incorporated almost no roasted barley. And since then, that is one thing that I think I've adjusted a little bit, but it's still an incredibly low amount for an imperial stout. I know because roasted barley is a big thing in, I would say, the stouts from 10 years ago, because you could get that, use that to get a really dark head. And so you wouldn't,
Right.
And so you wanted an aggressive, sort of mean looking stout. I mean, Dark Lord was really coming on strong. It was 2009. I guess that was really kind of,
That's old Rasputin territory still back then.
It's kind of almost, it probably peaked in 2009 really. And that was the first year that people really, I guess more brewers that I talked to anyway, were more upset with how sweet it was and how that soy sauce that it became known for, at least in people that I talked to. I think I've had 2 Dark Lords ever. But just hearing, that was the one that people were trading for. They had the big event. That was Dark Lord was the Imperial Stout of fame in 2008 and 2009 when I was getting into craft beer or brewing. And I didn't like that.
So we can trace back some of this insanity about standing in lines for special releases to that.
As far as I know,
Yeah.
and from my experience when I really got into it, which is, I'm a lot later than some people, but Dark Lord was it. That was the one.
Yeah.
You had to go there, and you had to have that one, and all imperial stouts were judged based on that, and it had the highest trade value, and people were paying $20 a bottle, and the wax and the different wax colors like that. They really, and I've not heard much about it lately, but I mean they really pioneered a lot of innovative things with beer releases, I would say. Even if imperial stout for them has gotten a little more, it's just a little more stagnant for them. Yeah, they've still got some following. Their event is, I'm sure, still a fabulous time, but it's not. There's just so many other ones now. Sure, and and that's the change that I think we've seen, and a lot of that. So for me, the recipe was, what I liked about imperial stouts was, or really just big dark beers. I wanted like milk chocolatey. I didn't want like acrid roast. I didn't want that. I didn't care if it had the dark head. I wanted it to be something that was, I thought those were some of the finer points that you could create with just grain out of, you thinking about it, it's like, a Hershey chocolate bar. There's no barley in that, but people love that. Right. And the fact that you could take barley and create a lot of those flavors was just fantastic to me. Yeah. And so that's where my recipes really, they come after that side. And so for a long time, I feel like we probably were one of the sweetest stouts out there, which we're probably not even close anymore. Yeah.
What do you target for starting gravity and a finishing gravity?
Interestingly, the first Rare DOS, and for the longest time, Rare DOS was probably only about 7%. It really wasn't that big, but it tasted big because it would finish between 10 and 12 Play-Doh. But we'd only start at, some of the biggest batches were like 28. It was just hard to go higher. Yeah. And there was no sugar additions in the kettle. That was something that I got from Wayne and just kind of stuck with me for a long time, was do it with the grain. Yeah. Make it with the grain. Yeah. And we've gotten away from that, not entirely, but we try to maximize with the grain, but we're not afraid of sugar anymore. And for a long time we were. And there's something to be said, but it was really more of a, pride macho thing to say you did it with the grain. It didn't make a better product necessarily. It was just, and at that point I was like, well, what are we doing then? Nobody knows or cares that we're doing it with just the mash and boil time. So we've gotten away from that.
Ironically, though, I mean, whether you thought about it or not, it has, generally when you're doing it with grain, you're creating, more unfermentables as well, and you create more body and to that kind of thing, and you create this thicker thing versus adding sugar in there, which will ultimately
depends on the sugar.
Okay.
It depends on
Let's talk about that a little bit more.
So many sugars out there. Yeah. We've experimented a lot because we've done 2 or 3 sort of friends that are starting breweries that may have made a name for themselves in the gray legal area of home brews that people trade for. But they're stouts and they're somewhat local, and so we would brew with them. I would offer to, and we're still open to it, but it was, come here. We have a warehouse. We have a great facility. And now that we don't brew for distribution here anymore, we have the time to where you can come here, brew imperial stouts, stick it in barrels, and then when your facility is open, you're not starting from zero. You have your beer in barrels, and in doing some of that, the amount of sugars that we have been introduced to from some of those folks has been, I think we will probably stock 8 different sugars now, 9, between syrups and powdered sugar. It really, you can do a lot with sugar. I don't think it doesn't have the depth from the sugar created in a mash, so I don't think it's a substitute. If you end up in the kettle at 22, you're not going to 32 with sugar and making a great product. It's just your ratio. You can't, I don't think you could pack enough flavor and know how to split that out with sugar to get to that gravity and make a quality product. And on top of that, some of the sugars that will give you a thicker body are not fermentable, are artificial sweeteners. Oh. I mean, maltodextrin. Oh, it's maltodextrin. It's sweet and low. It's an artificial sweetener, which the reason it has no calories is because it doesn't digest, also doesn't ferment, but it also has a distinct flavor. And so you can add body, but at some point you taste the artificial sweetener. Like, it's sweet and it's not off-putting, but you start to just pick out this, I don't know, to me it tastes inauthentic. It tastes fake. It's not. I mean, it's just a tool, but it changes what you're making. And so for me, sugar's not, it's not a substitute for a quality brewing process with thought and care and time invested in some of the more traditional brewing aspects, but you can almost layer sugar in to create what you're looking for. Like molasses, if you use a little bit of molasses, you can pull just enough molasses into the flavor that it gives you something that you wouldn't get from grain, but it's perceptible if you're looking for it, but otherwise it just adds depth and character. You can do the same with D2, the Belgian candy sugar, somewhat. Maltodextrin definitely will gives you some body, but it'll give you this different sugar quality. And then dextrose tastes like nothing, more or less. Lactose has, I think everybody knows that lactose sweetness. You can use DME as well. I still don't think it's quite as good as, mashed extracted sugar. It's probably how they make it, but it doesn't have all the specialty grains in there. Right. It's just too real, more or less. And then you have, honey. We've had some awesome beers come from different honeys, all the different types of honey. We did one with Brazilian pepper honey, which it's a tree. It's actually an invasive species of tree, but it flowers and they get honey. It's not peppers, like hot peppers. Right. It's just the name of the plant, but it has, the honey's almost green. It's kind of a neon color. And we've used 15 gallons, which is, I think the buckets weigh like 55 pounds or 60 pounds. So you can do the math on that. It's a lot of weight, but it's really in 15 barrels. It's not that much. But we did that in we call them, it's more like a stock ale than it is a barley wine. It appeals to a barley wine drinker, but it's not. It's darker in color usually. Okay. Because that's the way I like it. I like the darker caramels. But that even at 15 barrels with that much honey, you could just pull that Brazilian pepper honey note through. So I think, I think people would scoff at maltodextrin and DME to hit gravity, but no one scoffs at honey. Oh, that's a nice addition. It's just a different kind of sugar. Yeah. And so if you can get over some of the preconceived notions about adding sugar and just think of these as materials and, different colors on your palette to paint with, I think it opens up a lot. And that's one thing we have definitely grown with in the past few years.
Are you adding all of these then in boil when you add them?
Yep.
Okay.
Maple syrup too. That's just maple. It's not adding, a bag of sugar. I mean, kind of. It's more interesting maybe sugar, but it's just sugar.
Now, one of the challenges when you're adding it at a hot side, obviously you do want to do that because you're going to, sterilize it that way by boiling. But the big challenge when you're boiling is that you're driving off some of the nice little, volatile flavor and aroma elements that kind of come with something like molasses or honey.
Molasses has staying power.
Yeah.
Maple syrup does not.
Right.
Maple syrup has pretty much no staying power. We stopped using it in boil. It's just useless. I mean, it's not useless. It's sugar, but it's not. You don't get maple character. I think you probably have to go almost 50% maple syrup and 50% wort to get maple character to carry through. It just, for whatever reason, it's one of the hardest flavors to maintain. Whereas like that Brazilian pepper honey, for whatever reason, just a small amount carried through. And one honey that I really like, not for stouts necessarily, is meadow foam honey, but that doesn't, it's fantastic honey. It tastes like marshmallows.
Oh, it is. It's wonderful.
Yeah, we barrel aged some, which was awesome. It was just fun to get a 55-gallon drum of meadow foam honey. I have buckets of it still around. Yeah. But we barrel aged some of that. But we used it at Cigar City once. I've used it, and it loses that. I wanted to get that marshmallow to come through. Right. It just couldn't. So that's trial and error, really.
Do you adjust timing to try to hold on to any of those aromatics, or is it just kind of a 10 minutes left in the boil and toss
Whirlpool?
them in?
Usually
Okay.
we go with Whirlpool because it's moving, and the burner's off. Our kettle's direct fire. We learned a long time ago, thanks to a certain somebody, about dulce de leche. We made a dulce de leche stout called DDT. You can look up that beer. It was great beer, but that stuff is real thick, and it would go straight to the bottom and burn so badly to the bottom of the kettle. But honestly, that burning on the bottom of the kettle was some of the character of the beer, which was a great beer, and it was a really nice addition to the flavor profile. But it was also absolutely miserable to clean up, and I will never forget the first time our collab partner was here doing that beer, and it came time. We knocked out, tasted the wort. Cool. All right, I got to head out. And I looked in the bottom of the kettle. I'm like, guess cleanup's just me. That's a drag. But yeah, so when it comes time to add, it's different sugars behave differently in the kettle. A lot of our sugars now, like when it's a planned addition, will actually lauter and then whirlpool the beer and then add it before we get to boil, because the sugar will basically, the more stuff you have dissolved in water, the higher your boiling point. And so you'll drive off water faster, you'll boil down faster if you have a higher gravity to start with. And so, for example, I can basically tell when our gravity is going up by watching the temperature of boil. So, most of our beer boils were pretty close to sea level, 212. Double IPAs, 213, maybe 214. Imperial stouts, if we don't make it to 215, then I know we're too low and we got to keep going. So, and adding the sugar earlier just helps push that boiling point up higher. And so it didn't really seem to make a difference when you're talking about, DME, maltodextrin, cane sugar, dextrose, lactose. Those aren't aromatic compounds you're going to drive off. That's just flavor. And why wait to the end? And then maybe at the end, well, it's most of it dissolved, but sometimes you'll see like lactose will just sit on the bottom, or DME will form these like gnarly clumps. Some of the rice syrup solids, or brewer's crystals they call it, which is like glucose solids. They're like rocks. It'll form these rocks because, especially here, because it's so humid, even in the bag, you'll get these they're rocks. Yeah. And they don't dissolve for, we'll actually put them in a bag and hang it in boil, and it'll take 30 minutes for those to dissolve. So adding those at the end of boil, hopefully they dissolved. But if we hit it early and then go through boil, we know we get it dissolved. We don't have any of that issues, and we get that higher boiling point. So it made more sense. But something like maple syrup we used to add at the end, but it still didn't have enough impact. Molasses is very hearty, but we still add it at the end, and it's a liquid, so we don't have the solubility problems as much. If we were to do dulce de leche in the kettle, I don't know. I would do it with the burner off, though.
Yeah, yeah.
Even though it was so good burnt. It's so awful to clean.
So you do, now you'll use a little bit of sugar here and there.
Sure.
Obviously you're not brewing it for a 7% beer anymore.
No.
You've now kind of scaled that up.
Sure.
What is this modern kind of imperial stout, barrel-aged imperial stout base look like?
30 Plato's our floor.
Okay.
We go up from there. We're not very particular about where we end up above there, because our process, like our imperial stout, is made for barrel aging. That's specifically what it's made for. We've released probably 3 non-barrel aged stouts, and basically nobody cares. And when I taste them, it's like, man, this would be a lot better barrel aged. And so the recipe has always been, and as far as I'm concerned, will always be best barrel aged. So for us, we always have the ability to blend afterwards. We can pull from different barrels, different times. In Florida, the barrel aging process can be very rapid because in the summer, the beer is in the warehouse and it's 83 degrees day and night. The temperature in the air never gets below 80 for about 4 months straight. So it just never cools down, but because of that, it's pushing really deep into that wood, and or at least that's the theory. And so we get excellent barrel extraction. We've done, for a while, our imperial stouts, our rare DOS was probably 6 to 9 months in the barrel was really, and I haven't seen a huge difference going to over a year. It's a little more round, but at the same time, when we did that, we were also had an easier time scaling up because we got the new brew house in. So, there were multiple factors in play. This wasn't a scientific trial. I don't know for sure how everything plays, but we did a barrel that ran 2 years in Florida, and I was concerned. We actually lost the barrel in the warehouse and found it at 19 months. It's like, oh, there's batch 56. Whoops. And at that point, I was like, why don't we just go for 2 years? That's one barrel. We got plenty of other barrels. So we sat on it for 2 years, and that we still have a little bit of that left. But it was a really great beer, and the character is much different, and it's not like up north. I feel like it takes at least a year. I know Sean Hill talks about summers, how many summers a beer will take in the barrel, because his climate is much colder.
Right.
And for us, I feel like it's just straight time. It never really gets cold enough here to move that volume of liquid a bunch. It's probably tops.
We're here in
80.
December, and it's a high of 80 right now today.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So even on the cold days, like, oh, yeah, it'll be cold for 2 days. Well, that's way too much volume of liquid to cool down in 2 days to even just ambient temperature. It'll cool down some, but we're not getting those big swings.
Right.
So I think
you fit 3 Vermont summers into every 12 months.
Basically, yeah. And I think there's probably something to the cold weather aging, the in and out of the wood. I think that's something that we can't do. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm very happy with what we get out of the barrels. And going longer, the beer, it tastes older. It's oxidation. Yeah. It's what you'd expect, but I was really surprised and pleased the way the wood tannins didn't dominate. It wasn't just, oak. It actually retained a lot of really nice character, and you got a nice play. So because of the bourbon barrel aging, I've started to drink bourbon, so I'd understand it, because for the longest time, I'd never even tasted bourbon, but I'm bourbon barrel aging the crap out of beer. I was like, well, I should probably understand this side of the raw material, because I'm using a lot of them. And because of that, I think like the 2 year for a lot of craft beer drinkers, I think have gotten more into bourbon. I think it plays more into that taste side. So we're gonna try a few more. We've got probably 60 barrels. They'll probably wait for that 2 year mark, and then we'll do a series with the 2 year aged.
Let's talk a little bit about the impact of different bourbons and different aged bourbons on your beers. As you've gotten into bourbon and kind of explored that, talk to me a little bit about some of the different effects that whether it's the composition of that whiskey, whether that's bourbon or whether that's rye, whether it's wheated bourbon, whether it's a 2 year bourbon or a 4 year bourbon or an 8 or a 12 year bourbon. Talk to me a little bit about some of that range of difference that you've found in barrel aging your beers.
Yeah, we're probably in the minority on this, where I prefer more younger bourbon barrels. Not really young, like finishing barrels we've used. Not a big fan. They didn't bring the character forwards. But
you say finishing barrels, you mean barrels where they've moved like a bourbon into
like double oaked
for a year. They've thrown it into this other barrel just to add some character to it.
Yeah, the Woodford double oaked was the one we used a bunch of. We've gotten some other ones, and it's just okay. It wasn't bad, but it was just not rich. And I think they treat their finishing barrels. I don't think they char the same. I think they toast, which I didn't know at the time, but I think that had something to do with it as well. But we like, Heaven Hill, just the problem with bourbon barrels is how little information the distilleries want to share or care to share. Sure. If I've been to several, and they really don't care. And some of them are to the point where they're kind of mad that you're asking. Like, just don't talk to me about this. I have no information for you. And that's kind of frustrating. I also understand they don't want, and there's even laws about tying distilled products and fermented products together. There's all sorts of that to worry about, but it just seems like such a missed opportunity for everybody to not talk more about like what these barrels were, right? Because they are an important piece. But so we don't get a ton of information. Heaven Hill gives you nothing really. Yeah. We've used so many different types. But I really like what we get out of Heaven Hill, and I'm guessing those are like 4 to 7 year.
Yeah,
right in there. Probably Evan Williams barrels because they make a ton of that, and it's great, and they're consistently great. We've had ups and downs with some of the other ones. Big rye fan. I was actually born about 10 miles from Templeton, Iowa, home of Templeton Rye.
Yeah.
I've got family that was arrested for bootlegging, probably Templeton Rye, the not commercial version. So I've sought those barrels out. But we've used other rye barrels, Woodford Rye. Gosh, who else did we use? There's been a lot. Just what comes around, and when you need barrels, I just go to different suppliers and ask what you've got. And one of the most interesting barrels that we've just got a bunch of, we were told all of them, but that was a lie apparently, is Woodford's Chocolate Rye, their Master's Collection. I happened to be there visiting a friend, not to do anything with bourbon. I was up in that area, and we went to Woodford, and they were bottling the Chocolate Rye that day. Hadn't talked about it, and I said, those came out of a barrel, and that was a product that was designed from start to finish to be that. Whereas most bourbons, the craft is not in making the liquid; it's in selecting barrels and blending the liquid,
right?
And and storage. Like there's a lot to it, but it's not like from a brewery aspect. I'm looking at liquid production, and that's recipe formulation. Process, all of that. Those are important pieces to me. But
unless
for
you're
them,
Four Roses and making 12 different iterations of yeast and recipe, most distillers are
Buffalo Trace
2, 3, 4, maybe. But
I think Buffalo Trace is 3. They said, and it's just it was kind of disappointing. Like, is it an Eagle Rare barrel or is it a Buffalo Trace barrel? Like, they're the same.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. In some ways, the only thing that would matter to me is the older the whiskey, the longer it was in the barrel. For me, kind of the worse the barrel's likely to perform for barrel aging the beer. Which,
the better the marketing for the beer, and the worse the flavor, right?
Kind of. I mean, it's disappointing that way. Yeah. But in
you put Bourbon County in a 30-year bourbon barrel,
right? But at the same time, it sort of makes sense because in those 30 years, well, of course they took all the good stuff out of the barrel and they left you with a husk,
right?
So other than the liquid that is still wet in the wood, the oak itself is pretty well spent.
And after 30 years, right, there's a lot of dry oak inside of that barrel, and a very small amount of liquid left.
Yep. Right. So that's where I mean, I know people have done amazing things. I know the Dark Horse Gold Wax Pappy conspiracy theory was pretty hilarious. But yeah, other than marketing for the beer, I've not really enjoyed the beers much more. And I think but that's coming from my perspective as a brewer, where I have access to 500 bourbon barrels to go taste out of, whereas a consumer doesn't have all of that to play with. So you don't.
Yeah, and that's your environment here in Florida with the way that your warehouse ages your beer and everything else.
That's true too. That's also true. Yeah, but that's what I found works for me. The biggest difference I've found is size of the barrel. So what our first barrels were. Palm Ridge, they're 5-gallon wood barrels, the cutest little things. Very convenient because you could just pick them up and move them around as needed.
Sure.
But then we got a lot of Pritchard's barrels, 15-gallon barrels. And the aging process on those is much faster. So you're just dealing with higher surface area to beer ratio. And so the 5-gallon barrels you can have pretty great beer out of in 2 months, but then you have not even 5 gallons of beer. And then the 15-gallon barrels, I mean, going 6 months is definitely the limit. And the barrels themselves, just for whatever reason, seem to have crappier structural integrity. We've had more issues.
Definitely thinner staves. And
and so they dry out and leak, which thankfully, being humid here, we don't have a huge oak drying from the outside and shrinking problem. But those barrels we've always had problems with. And then on top of that, they're the size of the bung is like 1.5 inches, and the barrel's so short, there's not a bulldog for that. So emptying those barrels just sucks.
Yeah.
We used to we made a bulldog out of some pipe and one of the wood bungs that actually fits that hole. And we tried a rubber one, and nothing really worked because the barrels, if you pressurize them, you'd have these tiny little streams or mists of beer coming out from between the staves. And so we stopped doing that, and now we just siphon them like it's basically home brewing. We have 2 auto siphons. We pick them up on the forklift, run the auto siphons into the top of the tank. It works. We're probably introducing a ton of oxygen. It doesn't seem to affect it. It works. So that's how we handle those. But they're a pain in the butt. But you can, if you're looking at a project, say if we wanted to start if it was September and we wanted to have a barrel aged collab ready in March with somebody, we would source small barrels because we could pull that off in that timeline and make a quality product. Whereas with big barrels, especially over that winter timeline without all of the heat all the time, we'd have I don't think we could make as good a product. So there's something to be said about that. But really, when it comes to the bourbon barrels, there's like I think the sweet spot is probably like a 7-year. Whereas the Pappy 23 barrel age, great, go get it. There's hardly any of it, so whatever. It's not our thing though.
That's even marketing for Pappy alone. It's not the best bourbon they make. But we'll just leave that and let that one go.
Sure. That's a whole debate.
I still feel like I'm trying to wrap my head around the kind of core grains, because you mentioned that you try to build a good caramel component to it.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned you liked your Brice special roast.
Yep.
What is some of the rest of that malt bill look like for you, and how do you build some of that kind of caramel flavor in the middle of it?
We just use 2-row for the base. I've not found a lot of benefit to mixing up base malts, running Maris, Otter. We did a lot of that with Cigar City, and based on those results, it's never really something I've wanted to incorporate. It just adds expense without adding much character.
Yeah.
And a lot of times those other grains are not as efficient to get your sugar, which is really what it's about. It's all about sugar, not necessarily adding sugars, but the sugar content of the liquid.
I can see the nuance of some of those malts being completely lost.
Absolutely.
In the giant flavors and huge sweetness and adjunct-laden
I think so.
Kind of approach that you take here. Sure.
People who do them will tell you that it carries through. I know one guy uses 3 different base malts in his imperial stout, and boy, does it make a difference. I was like, okay. I feel like you might not know that blind tasting, though. Because you do that, you taste it. But otherwise, it just doesn't really, it's not a thing that carries, I don't think it carries the weight. I think you really get it from the other grains. And so we use, sometimes we'll use a bunch of Munich malt. Sometimes we'll use, what did we do? We did one with Golden Naked Oats, a lot of that. But it's not, those are grains to add kind of a different character, and we won't necessarily hit the darker specialty grains as hard in that, so that maybe some of that will carry through a little bit better. But it's not, when it comes to base, we stick with 2-row. And then for caramels, I like Caram Munich, 1, 2, or 3. We use a lot of Caram Munich 3. I think it's a beautiful caramel flavor. It's rich without being like Cara 120. I feel like there's a marked difference between those 2 grains, and I don't know the actual love bond on Caram Munich 3, but I feel like it's not easily replaced. I feel like what is it, the double roast DRC Simpsons? Is it double roasted caramel? I can't remember what it stands for. I don't know why I'm spacing that now. Yeah. But we use that grain, and that I think also has a really unique caramel flavor. And I feel like finding those grains that'll give you just a little nuance as opposed to just like Cara 10 through 60 or 10 through 80.
Right.
Those are a little monotone, and they're useful, but I feel like finding that little twist on the caramel grain will give you a little more range in like the middle of the beer, and that carries through. So we use Caram Munich 3. We do use Cara 80. I will always throw in light caramel malts. I feel like a lot of people miss that in stouts. I feel like it's underappreciated because they're making a dark beer. They go dark across the board.
Yeah.
Whereas there is really something nice about that bright sweetness that just completes that range. Whereas if you just go dark, everything tastes dark, and it's just, you get more burnt. Whereas I'm looking for that. it's not quite milk chocolate, but as a comparison, it's dark chocolate versus milk chocolate, and I want to skew towards milk chocolate more than I do dark chocolate. Not that I don't appreciate the other side, just for our beers, I found that works best, and I feel like that will always work best with the vanillas from the bourbon, because that is vanilla and milk chocolate. It's hard to beat.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, too, you're trying to kind of visualize and produce these things that are going to oxidize in a favorable character for you. Since you're thinking about how this beer is not going to taste right out of the kettle, but how it's going to taste out of a barrel 9 months from now.
It takes practice getting used to that. Also, tasting that beer at 83 degrees still out of the barrel also takes practice, because you get used to it. And then going around with people trying to, we can try some barrels, we'll pull some nails. And you hand it to people that have never done that, and it's warm. It's not, it's room temp, it's warm. And the heat from the booze is just exploding off your tongue. And like, oh, boy, that's hot. And it's like, yeah. No, it's because it's warm. Just relax. There's like all of our staff and myself, we get used to that flavor, and we just kind of ignore the alcohol burn. But it just comes with practice.
Yeah, how do you think about that? I mean, and that's an interesting point. It's something that sour beer makers also have to deal with when you are tasting these straight out of the barrel and trying to construct an idea of a blend from different batches and different barrels and different places. You are not just having to kind of taste those actual flavors. You're having to envision what those taste like 20 degrees colder, 30 degrees colder, as well as carbonated, with the additional kind of carbonic acid component to it, and how that brightness and effervescence changes that on your palate.
Absolutely.
How do you kind of wrap your head around that kind of blending process? And are there mental exercises that you employ to kind of remind yourself, or some things that you've learned about how those flavors move from when you're tasting the unblended into the actual final product?
Yeah, there's a few things. The first thing is, because it's warm and the alcohol is evaporating, you're going to get the aromatics really explode. And so you can almost get kind of like a fool's gold, where at 83 degrees at 4 months in the barrel, you'll get a lot of barrel on the nose, a lot of that bourbon, but it's not going to really be there once you're finished. Right. And so it's nice to be able to pick up the aromas. Like if you're using a different barrel or unique barrel, you can pick out a lot of the aromatics that will carry through. But there's a part of that you have to take it with a grain of salt, because it will change. But how it changes, you don't always know. But when it comes to things like the alcohol heat, there's still a range. Everything tastes like it has a lot of alcohol in it at that temperature, but it doesn't. Some will just be incredibly hot, and you know that, okay, well, this is probably is higher in ABV. That's one of the challenges we have. People ask, what's the ABV? And it's like, unless I have an alkalizer, I don't know. Like, it's been in the barrel. We've sent stuff off, and the range is you pick up nothing to you pick up 2 points. And so I wish I knew. I think if we were to print it, we would have to know. But that's an expensive piece of equipment, and the ABV is just not that important to me. It's certainly not a target.
Right.
But you can get a sense of that when you're tasting it warm. But mostly what I'm looking for is, do I have adequate vanillins? Am I picking up the vanillins from the barrel? That's the first thing. And then on top of that, do I have what we'll get sometimes is you'll get this sort of sharp caramel, like burn, that goes with the alcohol, and it can be hard to split that out, but you get used to tasting this. It's like, I don't know, a lot of people, if you've eaten too much candy and you just like that sugar starts to burn a little bit because you've just had so much and it lingers in the back of your throat, you get a little bit of that, and it's distinct. That's how I think of it. That's what it reminds me of. Yeah. And that's when I know, okay, this is probably not standalone. And we're consistent through the batch unless we split the batch into different barrels. So we're usually just tasting by batch, and then we'll blend based on that. But then you can get some where the sweetness that lingers is going to be the sweetness that you will get in the beer. That does not change hardly at all. And so if you taste a barrel and it's, that's That is sweet. You know that you have that, but that can play with other things like that 41 Play-Doh beer we did. It's like, that is sweet. We made syrup. It poured thick out of the barrel. And so you could tell, all right, I know there's a market for that on its own. I don't think it's what we've built our name on, and I'm not opposed to, showing that we can do that, but it's still, I feel like I'm a bad judge of it because it's not what I like. I like to be able to drink, a whole snifter, and there's a lot of beers that for me they do incredibly well in rate groups because everyone has like 1 or 2 ounces.
Right.
And it's amazing at that scale. And I feel like the first Rare Scoop we did was that. Like, this is incredible. I wish I had more. But if you actually tried to drink the whole bottle, you'd be like, man, I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's neat, but it's not really our goal, and it's not what I want to make. And so we try not to go too far down that road. But those are really the tasting notes, and it comes. The most interesting stuff that we do with tasting out of barrels is not really in the stouts. It's when we get into the stock ale, barley wine area, and that you can get a lot more variation. I feel like the barrels play a lot differently, and you can manipulate that a lot more. Whereas the stouts, at least when with what we're doing, we do brew several different stouts so that we have some variation to play with, and there are new grains like we talked about earlier. Like it's been awesome. Chocolate spelt. That I didn't know that existed until last year.
Yeah.
And that's fun. And so you can build recipes, and it started with just swapping out like the grain types. We use chocolate rye instead of chocolate malt or something like that. And then that didn't really work that well. So we had to just build new recipes to use some of the new grains and get some nuance and not be so monotone.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about pasteurization.
Sure.
This is something that the industry has looked to you for. You've written about it extensively. It's there on your website.
Sure.
You spoke with one of our writers, John Verivi, for the next issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine's Gearhead column about pasteurization, as we've kind of tackled the subject. Talk to me a little bit about your experience with that and the circumstances that kind of caused you to do more research and development on that, and some of the systems that you've started to employ, where you've ended up. And then I'd love to talk a little bit about how, integrating pasteurization into your process has impacted how you even, brew and then also add other ingredients into your beers.
Yeah, pasteurization has had a huge impact, actually. So just to start with pasteurization, first encountered it in craft beer at Abita. We were looking; they had their bottling line for sale. I worked at Cigar City. We were bottling on a PPM thing that I resurrected. It was awful. But going to Abita and seeing their pasteurizer, they used a tunnel pasteurizer. It was the first time I'd seen one, and especially in craft beer. And it was a very educational trip, talking with them about that. The bottler was fine. I had almost no questions, but I grilled them on that pasteurizer because it was fascinating. They were bottling, I think it's Andy Gator, their double IPA. This is a long time ago, and it was in bombers. And so we pulled a bomber before it went into the pasteurizer, and their pasteurizer actually went from cold, and then it came out of the other end cold again. So you could taste it cold side by side, pre and post. And I got to say, it ruined that beer in 30 minutes. Just ruined that double IPA.
Sure.
Well, that's a good education.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, talking about how they've been using it, and they said one of their big beers was Turbo Dog, very malty, chocolatey. And so they were like, and I said, so how does the pasteurizer work with that? I said, well, interestingly, our taste panel has been unanimous every time that it is better post-pasteurization. I said, well, that's something to file away. That's interesting because it ruined the double IPA.
Yeah, sure.
So just kept that in mind. And going forwards at Cigar City, we made some bad beers, really super infected beers. And pasteurization was seen as, something that exists. The big guys do it, but none of the craft guys were doing it. Cigar City wasn't really about to get into it, but it was seen as an option. It was, if we want to do X, Y, and Z, how can we do it. Our Cubano espresso, which had coffee, vanilla, and cocoa nibs in it, and we did it in 4-pack bottles, and they were infected, and it was terrible. And it was like, how can we make this beer stable?
Right.
And always in the conversation was pasteurization, and also never taken seriously because the equipment's expensive. So it continued to be batted around, and then they had they've got their lab going, and one of the beers they tested came back with some sort of bacillus, and so to save it, it was displaying no signs of infection, but it had living bacteria. So they went with basically a batch pasteurizer, because it was a small batch run. I think it was a barrel aged beer. I don't even remember which one, but basically just loading them into the mash tun and heating it covering them with water, hot water, and heating that water up.
Loading the finished packaged beer into the mash.
Just putting bottles on the false bottom,
Sure.
Load them in there, and then heating them with the sparge heads, running hot water through there until they got hot. There's a lot of problems with doing that, but at the same time, it did work. So, and it was, it's equipment you already have, so there's really no investment other than the water and the energy to heat it. So I was like, okay. So we had a
whole lot of people handing bottles down to
a lot of labor.
The bottom of your mash.
A lot
tun.
of labor. Yeah. But yeah, so when we first opened our tap room in 2013, we were at Pegs, and the cash to get us over the finish line to get open came from a bottle release that we did at Pegs in, I think, June. And so we opened in August, and we were hand bottling with a beer gun, and we did 1,200 bottles of one beer and like 600 of another one over a couple days. I think it was 2 days. It was miserable. We did it outside because we had no space, and so we did our best. I mean, we were not totally cavalier, but also there was no way for us to do it in a clean room or something. So the Rare DOS, the 1,200 bottle run, that beer ended up infected. And so we did. It was our first encounter with that. We'd had excellent stability. I mean, it's got plenty of alcohol. It's been sitting in barrels outside. Even we're storing the barrels outside.
Wow.
And it's like, if it was going to be infected, it would have shown up by now.
Sure.
Right. Well, that proved
that
not to be the case.
That logic was not true. Yeah.
So it seemed so reasonable, but it just wasn't. So we ended up with, that was our first encounter with that, and we just basically paid people. They claimed they had bad ones. Here's your money back, mailing cash. That sucked. We also gave the option to get a replacement bottle, which fortunately a lot of people took, so it could defer us spending the cash back out.
Sure.
Thank you, consumers. That was kind of a loan. And then we also, I think our third option had something to do with our barrel-aged event. I don't remember that exactly. But in any case, after that, we were coming up to another bottle release, and we didn't want to have the same problem, and we also wanted to add adjuncts to it, and so the risk was going up. So our first bottle run after that we did in the Bombers, and we had this little 4-head bottler. That's a generous bottler. It was a piece of metal, but it
filler.
Yeah, it. I mean, it did function. It was slightly faster, not 4 times faster than the beer gun, but it was slightly faster. And so we did that, and then our solution for that one was to just sit on it and incubate it. Like, we're not going to release this for 6 weeks. We'll incubate a case in the hottest place, which is not too hot, but like perfect temperature for infection. And so we had pulled, one bottle randomly, filled a case, put it up in this upstairs chiller room, which probably is in the summer in 110. It's like, perfect. That's great. We'll leave it there. And so then we went through all the bottles after 6 weeks, no problem. And so we released the beer. And then we did one with adjuncts. I was like, I don't trust this. So then we tried the mash tun pasteurization, and we had no issues with that beer. So we kept doing that. And it's super labor intensive. And then we got a bottler, like a real 12-head rotary bottler. And so now we're making, thousands of bottles. And like, that method it'll work. Fortunately, we had 2 mash tuns on that brew house that we decommissioned. So we used both of those mash tuns. So we're alternating mash tuns, and we're able to more or less keep up with the bottler running this mash tun. It's like a batch or bath pasteurizer. But the problem with doing that method is without a probe, you don't know what temperature you're getting to. And everyone's like, oh, we'll just take a bottle out and measure it. Well, you're going to heat them up until they explode. So you're not going to reach in there with exploding bottles. It's incredibly dangerous. There's actually, the first time we did it, because I knew we needed to get as hot as we could to hit pasteurization temperature, hopefully, in the bottles. And so when they start exploding, that's as hot as we can go, because if we keep going, we'll have no beer left. It'll all explode, which, great, we don't have any bad beer. We also have no beer.
Yeah.
So it was sort of finding that. That was our target, and that was the plan. And it was sort of working. And we did that for a couple of years, and then invested and actually bought a tunnel pasteurizer, because for me, the best thing, we weren't doing any packaged sour beers or fruit addition beers at the time. We still aren't, but it was all about what's the best way to ensure I have a quality product. I mean, people are paying a premium. I feel like I owe it to them to have confidence in what they're purchasing. That was always my thing. That's why we gave people their money back. I'm like, this isn't cheap. This is a premium product. We're charging not quite top dollar, Corey King, but but we're charging good money. I mean, this is expensive beer, so we owe.
Corey is not the most expensive out there these days. I know a few folks that are gunning for him. I think Toppling Goliath may have taken that with.
Good point.
With the $100 KBBS this past year.
It's good for them.
All there is a consumer that's willing to pay it, or a consumer that isn't.
I agree.
Is the market there, or is the market not there?
I agree. I agree 100%. People complaining that it's too expensive, just don't buy it. It's not exactly. It's not worth complaining about.
Plenty of expensive things in the world that I can't afford. I just don't buy them.
Yeah, and it's not worth being mad about it.
No.
So I
don't.
There's
plenty of things you can't afford.
I don't get the anger. You want to make fun of it because it's expensive and it seems ridiculous to you. Sure, it's whatever, but don't be mad about it. It's not the brewery's fault that people want to pay them a lot of money. So anyway, but because of that, so I wanted to make sure and do the best we could, and so for me, tunnel pasteurization won out over like a HTST, high temp short time, or flash pasteurizer. Like a tank-to-tank kind of pasteurization process, because then I could do anything I wanted. And I always felt like, based on my experience with Cigar City, the packaging line, there are so many tiny spaces, little channels, seals, just so much potential in that machine for something to go wrong, that if I start out with a pasteurized product, I still don't know if I've done it by the time it goes through the machine.
And I think, to clarify for people that aren't as familiar with this, a tunnel pasteurizer takes your finished packaged beer, runs it through this long tunnel over time, heats it up.
Yeah, a tunnel pasteurizer is it's a long tunnel. It's a very wide belt. Ours is about 3 feet wide, and it moves in inches per minute. So we're running at like 6.9 inches per minute. Incredibly slow. It's about 30 minutes end to end, which makes it very time consuming to run tests on, because it's 30 minutes per test. So, but
versus a kind of flash pasteurizer, which will move beer from one tank to another and pasteurize it through a kind of coil kind of system to heat it for to that kind of pasteurization point.
Yeah, and the biggest difference.
But your system, with a tunnel, means that it's at the very end of the process.
The next time that bottle is opened is by the consumer.
Right. Versus pasteurizing before you put it through packaging.
Sure. Yeah, and the two pasteurizations have a notable difference, not just in how the process works, but in the temperature. So, flash pasteurizer, or HTST, I think it's the more technical term, is they run to 160 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 seconds, roughly, is the standard. And ours, you can't get to 160 degrees in the package safely. So pasteurization begins at 140 or 60 degrees Celsius, and then I believe it's every minute at that temperature is one pasteurization unit. And then if you go up in temperature, then you get more PUs per time, or you can just extend the time. So for us in the tunnel, we're only getting to about 145, 146, like 63, I think is like our peak in the bottle, but it's running over several minutes. And so we'll end up we get our PU calculation, and same as HTST at 15 seconds only at 160 degrees, we'll have a PU calculation, and they may be the same pasteurization unit, but I do think there is a difference in the quality of the pasteurization. I do think the higher temperature will give you closer to a sterile product. Pasteurization is not sterilization. They are not the same. They should not be construed. You are extending shelf life. You are not guaranteeing there is nothing living in the product. That's an important thing for anybody getting into pasteurization to understand is do not trust it as sterilization. It is not that. It has a very important function and can give you the stability you're looking for, especially when you're dealing with like a barrel-aged stout, which already has a lot of product stability aspects to it. But those things often are construed, oh, it came back with, clean, perfect zeros. And it's like, but you're not, maybe, hopefully, but more often you'll get like non-spoilage factors. And so you'll get bacteria that won't live in beer, but isn't dead either. And so you don't have a spoilage problem. You just have, not perfect. And so that's really the goal of pasteurization. So for us, the tunnel ensures that even if we weren't quite perfect on the bottler or something happened en route to the bottler, I still think we will have a shelf-stable product thanks to the tunnel pasteurizer. Whereas with HTST, it's a much smaller unit, which works for a lot of facilities. They have a lot of space constraints often. I feel like the main purpose of that is you're worried about bacteria from the barrel. And, there is air exposure, so there is potential for contamination there always. And then a lot of times we're talking about adjuncts. So you're looking to add a bunch of adjuncts, and there are limitations on what you're allowed to add into beer. So, alcohol extracted flavors require extra care and forms to fill out with the federal government. Definitely, there's a lot of flavor extracts that are glycol-based, and they'll contain natural and artificial flavors. They want that on the label. They want a FDA callback number. They want all this stuff. Whereas if you just use actual coconut, good to go. I believe a few years ago they made an approved list of ingredients where they were just getting inundated with a statement of process, which is the form you fill out to say you're adding something that's not normally in beer. And it was things like, oh, we're going to put raspberries in a sour. And it's like, yeah, raspberries are fine. And they just had to, like all day you could have had someone there, raspberries are fine. And so coffee, same sort of thing. And so they made a list of materials that you don't need a statement of process anymore. It's fine, but you have to use the actual materials. You can't use an extract of those materials, at least not legally. So anyway, when you're talking about adding adjuncts, it's a lot nicer. And you get the fake flavor out of a lot of those extracts anyway. So people want to use, actual coconut, real coffee, all of that. And so your cocoa nibs instead of like chocolate flavoring, things like that. So with all of those things, there's not very good ways to sterilize them without affecting their flavor. And so, you could cook it. Well, that changes it. Boil it. Obviously, it's going to change it. Put it in boil. Well, is that going to carry through? All the way through fermentation, are you going to get all of those things? Probably not, especially coconut, all those oils. It doesn't. So adding them after fermentation is, of course, now one of the riskiest times to add something. And so maintaining a stable product, people do some crazy things to focus on sterilizing the materials. And for us, we went the other way. We said, let's just let the materials be. Most of the time, they're probably fine anyway. We've made hundreds of variants and not had any issues. And let's just go and say, okay, well, we have a ton of factors before this point, and let's draw the line here to where we can take care of any of those. And the amount of time they spend with the raw materials, if they've survived barrel aging already, then from coming out of the barrel to hitting the bottle is, maybe 2 weeks. And probably a lot of that's cold to get carbonated because we do force carb our stuff. Which you wouldn't be able to tunnel pasteurize a bottle conditioned product unless you waited till it was carbonated and then pasteurize it. Which we didn't want to get into that. And there's plenty of arguments why bottle conditioning tastes better. Maybe that's fine. It's not for us. We like the control. So I think the tunnel pasteurizer is a solution, and it was something that we invested in prior to our most recent, very public failing with a release. We did, it's 2 years ago? 3 years ago. I think it'll be 3 years ago in March. Yeah, we had infected bottles. We had to cancel Beer Week, basically, which is Tampa Bay Beer Week is our biggest week. That was a very bad day. The worst part was 6 months prior, and I believe maybe even 9 months prior, we'd purchased a tunnel pasteurizer, and it had been delivered in December, but we didn't have the space prepped to set it up yet. So the way it looks is it was a very reactionary purchase. We were actually very proactive with the tunnel pasteurizer, and to have it sitting there and knowing that it would have saved us, and we didn't push hard enough to get it going, just that hurt as well. That was a behind the scenes and less public hurt. But yeah, so that was the education into pasteurization of barrel-aged stouts is a little harder than pasteurization of an American adjunct lager like Budweiser. When we first got the tunnel pasteurizer set up, we commissioned it, and the bottles start going in, and it sounds like we're popping popcorn. We lost 40% of the bottles. Fortunately, these were test bottles, so it wasn't. It was actually infected beer. It tasted bad, but it didn't have that overcarb. So that we didn't figure that was much of a factor, and we just put them in the cooler so they would start cold, and those would be our test bottles because we were going to have to dump it anyway. So it wasn't 40% of good beer being lost, but it was also, oh shit, is this going to work?
Yeah.
So then we got through more of that, and it turns out the issue was the bottles we had switched to were thinner glass. They had the same rating, but they did not perform as well. They were more prone to blowing up, basically. And then on top of that, basically what we monitor fill for is low fills, because we're not going to short the customer. We're not going to sell low fills.
Sure. But
if it's a little high, no big deal. Who cares, right? It really matters for pasteurization because, and this is something, so I had actually gotten it all dialed in using an American adjunct lager. We bottled up a bunch of it to run tests and dial in the pasteurizer. Bought a probe so we could really measure what was happening with the liquid. It was the first time we were really paying attention to that and making sure we hit pasteurization. Because if we'd hit pasteurization before and we'd had, 4 years of success releasing 150 different beers, and we had no issues. And then suddenly we had an issue with 2 beers out of 5. Like something seemed like it changed, but really I think it was just luck catching up with us. We'd been probably mostly lucky.
Yeah.
And so then it comes down to precision filling. So a high fill bottle, because I dialed it in with the American adjunct lager. I'm like ready to go. We're set up to run barrel-aged stout. Bottling day, I'm like, we got this. This is going to run super smooth. It's going to be great. I'm going to load bottles on over here, and they'll come through the horseshoe, and the first side of the horseshoe is the labeler, filler, crowner, and the second side coming back is that long tunnel. I'm like, they're going to come off of here. They're going to be labeled, done. Like usually it was, we'll fill them, and then we'll have to go back and pull them out of the boxes and label them. Like we were prepped. And they start running through the pasteurizer, and they just start exploding. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I called up the pasteurizer people. I said, this is what I've got going on. They said, talk to this guy, because apparently they make them also for the AB plants. And so it's this guy at Anheuser-Busch, and I called him, and I said, this is what's happening. Like this, I have it. The fill height marked, like maximum fill height, was my test for the American adjunct lager, like how full is too full? What will make them explode? So I'm running all these like millimeter increments, and I'm getting consistent at this height. I'm getting 100% success. I'm not expecting it to always be 100%, but it should be close. Like we'll be in the 90s and so we start running, and we're down at like 40% loss again. This is not working. And I called him, and he says, that doesn't make sense. That can't be happening. You must be running hotter. Must be this. Check this. And I get the probe. We're at like 138. We're not even to pasteurization. Oof. So I said, I'm not hotter. I'm not, too slow. He's like, well, it still doesn't make sense. I was like, I'm aware that it doesn't make sense. That's why I'm calling you. And he says, well, I can't help you. That doesn't add up. I'd have to be there. I was like, well, obviously I'm not going to pay to do that. So he wasn't really offering anyway. But I did a little more research, and I said, okay, what are my variables? It's the liquid in the bottle. That's my only variable here. And if you get into, it's probably like physics, a gen ed physics class, there is math regarding the expansion of water based on how dissolved, the same as like boiling point goes up. So water will expand differently the more stuff that's dissolved in it. And so it was really about salinity. And so as you heat up or cool, ocean water expands and contracts differently than just distilled water.
Right.
And it's the same sort of thing. So the more stuff that's dissolved, like say I have 12 Plato beer with a ton of sugar and some adjuncts in it instead of, what probably started out at 11 Plato OG and finished around 1 light lager, then you're dealing with different expansion. So the fill height had to lower. We had to be we could be like 22.2 ounces was the max out of in a 22-ounce bottle. Like any higher than that, and you might as well throw it away because it's just going to explode in the machine. And so a precision fill height was the biggest surprise, the hardest thing to solve because nobody had information on that, and that was a real education in just liquids and really understanding what you're dealing with. And there's always more factors than you're considering. It seems like, and so we have it figured out, and we can run our temperatures up. Like we did one with. We did a series of single origin vanilla beans, and the Mexican vanilla beans, that bottle came back with incredibly low levels, but still some levels of spoilage factor, lactobacillus. And so we took those bottles, like we'll take them day of, overnight them, because it takes a week to get results. And we want independent lab testing. I don't want to do it in-house. I don't want to be making these mistakes. So we send multiples to an independent lab to do what they do, because they do good lab work. At least we hope. They're set up to do good lab work. We just couldn't get to that level. And so we then got the bottles. As soon as we saw the results, it's like, okay, well, we're not going to throw it away unless we have to. But if we're going to have to throw it away, we might as well pasteurize it again and ramp that temp up. So we did, and we tripled the PUs, because a little bit of temperature over that amount of time will really jump that PU number. So we went from our standards about 12, and we hit 36. And so sent the bottles off for testing again. Good to go. So even at 12, we'd had consistent results before and after, even as low as 6 PUs on some beers. But it just goes to show that there are, knowing if you could know, but understanding that just because you've killed lactobacillus at this temperature one time doesn't mean the next strain of lactobacillus will die at the same temperature. And if you get into some paper from some Danish scientist beer, I think it's Tuborg actually, from the 60s, they go into pasteurization and all the things, and there are lactobacillus strains that will survive. I think they did 140. They just kept it at 140 and then just extended the time, and you had to go to 20 minutes on like one specific strain that they had isolated to kill it. But the rest would be dead. So if you were at 140 for 10 minutes, 99%. But if you went to 20 minutes, you were, for what they had isolated at the time and could test for, you would hit 100% of the spoilage factors dead. So we don't trust our machinery implicitly like we did, because we've had such horrible, very public failures. We can't afford that again. I feel like we've got 2 strikes now. One that most people don't remember from 2013. One that probably a lot of people very much remember. But that it's been now, I don't know that we could survive a 3rd strike.
It's what, trust but verify, right?
Exactly. I'm much happier with what we have. I sleep better with the confidence and our repeatable process. I mean, there's really no or very little human element to this. And the HTST, to me, I know the way they work, just that such a short time, if you have any variation, like any little dip, that time is so quick that it would almost be missed. Whereas with the tunnel, it is so long. Like there's pretty much no chance a bottle could go through there and not make temperature. It's just that slow and methodical with how it works. So I'm an advocate for it. I understand there's space constraints. I'm an advocate for everybody trying pasteurization for adjunct stouts. If you look at our ratings, And certainly our in-house panels, the pasteurized bottles are a better product. It makes better beer. Malty beers through pasteurization are improved.
How now you mentioned Andy Gator earlier getting destroyed through this process. How does that pasteurization process impact adjunct ingredients that you add into these big stouts?
It incorporates them more or less.
Incorporates them.
That's what I would say.
Okay.
I think you can talk about.
Well, now you're cooking them, but you're cooking them in a little way in an environment where they can't lose the aromatics because
It's
it's already inside the sealed package.
Exactly. You can change them, I think, but I don't think we're really hot enough to be seeing dramatic changes.
Yeah.
But it is, I would say, coconut oils get infused better into the beer.
Huh.
We've had our old method of pasteurization. We would get, especially the toasted coconut, we would get like the coconut oil, the coconut fat congealed, and it would form a plug.
Yeah.
On top of the beer that you could see, and it would pour out in chunks. And I'm like, there's no, looking at it, it looked like, pieces of flaked coconut. But I was like, that can't be in the bottle. It wouldn't make it through the machine. Like, there's no way for something that size to get through all of our stuff and into the bottle. It just couldn't have made it.
Yeah.
And then if you grab it, it's like, oh, it's congealed coconut fat, which apparently is horribly unhealthy. Almost entirely high cholesterol, bad cholesterol, saturated fat. It's one of the worst to consume for health reasons, not poison by any means.
So instead, the process of pasteurization just integrates that into the beer.
I think it
so
does.
you don't get reminded that it's actually there nonetheless.
Well, yeah, people like. I mean, you don't destroy the tiny little particles. What looks like
Right.
almost like a Starry Night kind of look,
yeah.
and the oils are definitely still there because that head will just die.
Right.
But you don't. We have not seen that hard plug form again.
Yeah,
And we're using equally as much coconut or more now. But the other side is you just get, I think the cocoa nibs, they incorporate into the beer better. And mostly what I think you really get is it's premature aging.
Yeah.
And so people call it bottle shock or can shock. There's supposedly a sweet spot like 2 weeks after something is packaged where it's back to homogenized. Whereas initially it'll be, I guess they say it's stratified. There's a lot of theories. I don't know that anybody's got hard science on it. But there's a lot of theories about too fresh from package, especially with the hazy IPAs. I think that has more to do with the crud settling.
Yeah.
Yeast with a lot of hop oil on it is pretty bitter and pretty rough. But when you settle that out, it's pretty great. So I think what we're seeing in the bottles is you get, because we can't, that's one thing we don't get because we tunnel pasteurize is the draft isn't pasteurized. We keep it cold. We serve it fresh. We have a lot of control over, supply chain
Right.
of that. And it's consumed on site. So if there's a problem with it, right away. It's not, oh, well, I traded this to my buddy who traded me $200 worth of beer for it. Now he wants $200. I'm like, I got $30 for the bottle. I'll give him $30. That's all I got. I'm sorry he traded $200. Well, he wants you to send it. I'm like, I can't we're going to do our best. I'll give you back everything that I got for it. But it became an interesting problem where you sold everything in one place, and then you're trying to make it up to people who, purchased it. It was all purchased from one establishment, but they're not even close. Oh, I'm in Sweden and I had this beer. I'm like, sorry, I don't know what to tell you at this point.
Yeah.
Send it back. Go back through your chain where it came back from, and we'll work with you as best we can. Or if domestically, we didn't send anybody beer. We can't do that, but we did.
There's, I think that's the dangers of any secondary market that anyone operates in, whether you're buying Nikes or there is a limited, I think, responsibility on the part of the manufacturer for that kind of anything that's kind of sold and then resold. But
I think there's a limited responsibility, but I also think for us I think there's more responsibility because of the nature of the product. I feel like there's something to be said when people trust what you make and they're putting faith in a premiumly priced product that you can't. I think it should be more on you. Where there's plenty of margin in there for you to handle this better. then
And I think the question for you as a producer is, if you stand behind it, are people willing to take that risk in the future on that product?
that's been my bet.
And if you don't stand behind it, then people may not take that risk, and then you may not sell as much of it because people don't have that kind of faith that you will make good on that. So
I've seen it both ways, and I've not really seen the penalties.
Yeah,
and maybe I'm just an idiot, but I don't know. I feel like for me, it's just personally I couldn't do that.
Yeah,
I couldn't do that to people.
Before we close this, what does success look like for you, Doug, in cycle brewing?
That's a great question. I could have told you 6 years ago exactly what it looked like. And it'd be pretty close to where we ended up. I feel like we've achieved everything that I set out to achieve at this point. And that has actually, in the past year to 2 years, kind of led to an internal crisis of, now what? I still don't have a great answer anymore. It always was achieving what we've achieved. We got out of debt. We're operating. We have, plenty of time in our leases. We've got a lot of good things going. And I think now it's sort of coincided with how craft beer has changed to where success some days to me just looks like survival. It is, are we going to, I feel like maintaining the upward trajectory we had for the first 3 years was not sustainable. Plateauing would have been great, but we screwed up beer multiple times in a row, so that really kind of went out the window. So now it's not that we're in a great position financially to where we're not at risk of shuttering anytime soon, but at the same time, what is success? Is it just rebuilding what we had maybe prior to the issues, which I don't know that that's really on the table. I feel like the consumers, and I think it's something we're working towards, and success is going to be finding and engaging with new consumers, because for what built us, it probably does go back 10 years to that rare DOS keg that went to a tasting group and went out and got highly rated from, one guy put that in motion, and it worked out, and then we've just steadily built on that. But the people that helped build that are those consumers, and I would say that from that tasting group, I think there's one brewery owner, one VP at a brewery, and the rest probably don't even bother with craft beer anymore. Like they've moved on. They've got families, they're older, and the chase and the trades and the checking the rate box and all that, just there's no appeal for them in that anymore. And so they don't. I feel like the chase for beer is shifting dramatically. And so for us, it's now we've sort of run our course with it's admittedly a lot of people,
sure,
but a lot of them, it's their tastes are shifting and what they want, and the accessibility that we provided, which was to get away from that secondary value and get away from that secondary chase. It was, these beers, to me, a barrel-aged stout with adjuncts in it has mass appeal. You're talking about dessert flavors. People love sweet things.
Yeah.
Like you make something chocolate and coconut and vanilla, that has mass appeal for a flavor profile. And I feel like there's no reason there shouldn't be more accessibility on that end. Now, how do we translate that into bringing in new consumers, and how does that translate from our old business model, which was very much secondary trade hype oriented, to not necessarily an average consumer, but somebody who is looking for that special bottle that isn't, part of the hardcore craft beer community. And I think that's going to be, I'm hoping we can be successful in looking in that direction. And I think that's really, as far as I can tell, about the only direction we have. I don't think there's room, unless you want to, make just 200 or 300 bottles of a stout and then release 50 of them and let it get out there and have that, basically it's just scarcity. People taste scarcity. Yeah. And I think you've seen it in bourbon, you see it in wine, and sure, it's certainly true in beer that the scarcity flavor, which, it goes back to the naming of rare DOS, that rare taste is, whether it's, something that chemically on your tongue or it's chemically in your brain, it's real. I don't think anybody can deny that. And for a while, there were just so few breweries that it was easy to tap into that scarcity. And now it's not. And so changing from that, I think success will be continuing to, for what we've built. I mean, we've got great staff. I love that we're providing old school jobs. I mean, we've got full-time salaried employees with retirement accounts and health benefits. It's like, this is the 1950s job. You can work here for a long time, and the company will try to provide, because the people that work here are what makes this place work. And so I'm feeling more pride in that, and maintaining that. I think that will be certainly one of the main measures of success if you ask me, in another 5 years.
Well, we'll come back and ask you about that in another 5 years. If people want to learn more about Cycle, where do they find you?
Right now, I'd say the best way to find us is if you're looking for what we're doing. Instagram, we've had a little transition in our social media. One of our guys moved away, jerk. No, he was great. He just intuitively understood social media, and I know that's something that nobody else on staff, myself included, does have that natural knack for it. But I think Instagram will keep you informed of what we're doing pretty well. Certainly release details, anything special we've got going on tap. But if you're looking for more in-depth information, especially about pasteurization, you can read from our website. I cover a lot. There's more. So if anybody has questions or wants to figure out how to do it without, $150,000 to $200,000 investment, there are ways to do this. I mean, the batch pasteurization method with the mash tun, if you've got a beer with, heavy adjuncts and you don't have confidence, or you just want to add that layer of confidence to that bottle release, it is viable. It does work. You need to spend about $450 on this little sensor that goes inside a bottle, and you need to watch your fill heights. But it is a viable method for a one-off beer. It's worth looking into. I really think craft brewers would do well. I mean, I don't think there's been. I think the bad imperial stouts out there, the harder to enjoy ones, have been more fundamental problems, not necessarily flawed with bacteria, but beyond that, I think there will be more breweries will see that reckoning come back around, and it's avoidable. It's avoidable with the equipment you have now. If it's one off, and if you want to go get deeper with it, by all means.
Hashtag no excuses.
Basically, yes.
G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Tavour is the tastiest way to explore the world from the comfort of your home. October Can Seamers is the small-scale canning solution, and Clarion Lubricants are the experts that experts trust. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we hope you go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and become a magazine subscriber. Support what we do. We love being able to bring these conversations to you free every week, 52 weeks a year, and we thank you for listening over this past year of the podcast. Doug, thanks for joining me on the last podcast of 2019, the last podcast of this decade.
Beat me to the dad joke. Got me. That's fair. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. Cheers. This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com, or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.